Hello book fans. I've been reading a book by Cariad Lloyd, and here she blows. It's You Are Not Alone. This is all about grief. So if you have a friend or a family member who's grieving, or somebody who isn't grieving other than yourself, then this book will help you to understand the process a little bit more, especially if you've not been through grief yourself and you've not lost a loved one that's very close to you. This book, it kind of dispels a lot of the myths of grief, and I think it's very well written. It goes through a mix of talking about the process of grief, if there is a process, and then going into a few examples, both of Cariad. She talks about her dad, who she lost when she was 15 years old. By lost, I mean, I don't mean that she lost him in a park or something. I mean, he died. He was a triathlete, and it was a shock. So I think it's a shock that's reverberated through her life, and it's been, I don't know, I probably can't even say really how she feels, but it seems like something that's been with her for the rest of her life up until the last 20 years. And what we're saying is, with grief, is what people expect is that there's a period of grief, sadness, extended sadness, depression, that kind of thing, and then it just goes away, it fades away. But what this book is saying is that it's not always the case. There are some examples where the grief does fade away and it goes to the background, which is kind of what happens, I think. But it's not always a case of people deal with it in very different ways, and they're not always the best ways of dealing with it, because we're told that grief is something that we can work through, and that there's a step, A to C, and we work through the process and we get to the end and it'll all be hunky-dory, back to normal. But what Cariad is saying is that that's not the case, that it's something that will be with you for the rest of your life, but it's not necessarily something that is going to be disastrous for the rest of your life. It's going to be intermittent, just moments, which is kind of what I remember. There's moments of sadness when you remember that the one that you loved is not there anymore, because from my own perspective, it's almost like you're not in the same place, but then it's like, it's not like the dead. It's difficult to conceptualize, really. But sometimes you kid yourself into thinking that they're just not there, rather than being dead in the ground and buried. But it's a good selling point for Christianity, really, isn't it? Because then you believe that they're in a heaven or a hell, and maybe you'll meet them again in the future, hopefully in the former rather than the latter. But yeah, I mean, the other thing is, I think the kind of good part about this book was the 5-step process, how she talks about that. The 5-step process, I had to Google it again because I keep forgetting how many stages there are, but you kind of have the sadness, the anger. So denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Now, this is nothing to do with grief. The doctor who came up with that, it's about cancer, terminal cancer diagnosis. So when you have a cancer patient, that is the process they go through. It's nothing to do with grief. It's to do with their own death, and as you'd imagine, you're not going to accept it very easily. I wouldn't. I think I'd go through all sorts of interesting phases, but that's not in relation to grief. Even though depression, sadness, and even perhaps denial is in there somewhere, but it's not a process that you work through. You complete one level, you go to the next level. That's not really true. Not in my experience, and not in a lot of the experiences of people in this book. So I think you should read it if you've been through grief as well. If you've had someone die, and to me it's a little bit upsetting reading it. I've got to be honest there, because it brings a few things back into my mind. I know when I lost my mum, we spent a lot of time working through things, sorting stuff out. There was a hell of a lot to sort. It was 3 solid weeks of work. None of that, there was some grief in there, sadness, but just too busy. And that's kind of what one chap advised to me. Oh, well, you know, when such a body died, I just worked through it and it was all okay. Well, that's not really a good process, because if you're working through it, you're not really going through grief. You're not really assimilating what's actually happened, the shock of it. And it is a shock. When I found out it was a shock, I didn't know. I just kind of, you know, cried a lot. Yeah, it's very sad. I'm trying not to think about it now. But this book, I'd say it was a difficult one for me to read, mainly because of my own losses and things, and going back into those. So I kind of thought of it as a 4 out of 5 read. But realistically, you can't underestimate how important this book is for everybody to read. So it's at least a 4.5, if not a 5 out of 5 experience. Although it might be tough at times, depending upon your perspective. Like, she gives examples as well of people who haven't been through the grieving process saying, "Oh, well, it'll never happen to me." Well, if they're a psychopath, they're probably right. But if they're most of the population, then it will have an impact on you. So don't fool yourself into thinking you can just go back to work, crack on, lads. Just take time and deal with it the best that you can. And if you're a friend, you know, with somebody who's died, I suppose it's very difficult. We have that saying, don't we? You know, I'm sorry for your loss. And we have all these words like loss, and we don't say dead. I'm sorry that your mum's dead. We don't say that. But I suppose the best thing to do is just be a friend and stay in contact. Don't go away. Phone them up, just talk to them about you know, ask them about their day. I mean, it's a bit daft saying how are you feeling, because you know it's going to be shit. I mean, I found that is probably the best thing to say is, oh, well, that's just shit, that is, you know, because it is what it, no, that is it. You can't, I mean, I feel it's a bit false saying I'm sorry for your loss, because, I mean, I'm sad that they've lost somebody. But it's not my sadness. I'm sad for them, but you know, it isn't necessarily there. It's certainly not there in the level that they are feeling it. So empathy, and just don't leave them. You know, keep talking to them. Take them out for a drink if they're ready for it. You know, I don't know. Just keep an eye on them. Keep talking to them and make sure they're okay. And be excellent to them. Be as positive as you can. And when they cry, just let them cry. Just be there for them. Give them a hug or something. Let them cry. Don't feel squeamish about it. Don't feel awkward if they cry, if they're sad. That's what occurs with death. And it's not something that suddenly clears up after a certain amount of time, like 6 months, a year, it could be 2 years, and you'll still cry. You know, it still happens. So anyway, yeah, it's difficult one for me to read, I think, but I did read it, and it was well written, very good book, recommended. Give me your comments if you found that useful, or if you've got any questions, and I'll try and answer, but really all the answers are in here a lot better than how I could answer them. So thank you very much for watching, and hope you're having an excellent day. And stay positive out there as much as you can do, and be excellent to each other. Thank you very much.